I'm in the Tillamook State Forest today, heading up Cedar Butte Road to visit the Augite locality, which is about a half-mile away from the Cedar Butte Trailhead. And as you might imagine, at that locality, there's Augite. This is Cedar Butte Trailhead with a wooden fence pointing the direction of way to go and some walking sticks for you. But I just went up a different way and came back down from that path, and I did not see an area for collecting Augite. I drove my car up this rougher road a little bit, and I think there's two roads up there, and I think I took the wrong road, so gonna have to go back and take a new road and see if that works out any better. Down that way is Cedar Butte Road, and if you have a four-wheel vehicle, it's a little rougher. You can drive up this way, and there's a little bit of a parking area, which is where I am. And I assumed that the Augite locality would be uphill, so I went uphill, which was, immediately right there, the trail goes up a incline that I had to dig into to make steps, so that was probably a sign that I should have stopped. But there's a road over here that I think I'll walk down a little ways and see if I can find the Augite locality that way. Okay, this looks a lot more promising. So where the trail takes kind of a hard fork left, let's see, try not to trip over trees on the way. But up there, you can see some brown in the distance there. I believe that's the locality, according to GPS. So we'll take a walk up that way, and there is actually a trail, so that's convenient. It's a little steep though, so I won't record it. Well, this is definitely it. Made it to the locality, and I honestly would have been a little annoyed if I didn't find it today, because this locality has actually been known since at least the 60s. It's in some old ore bin geology from the Oregon Coast Geological Society. So we're here, let's see what we can find. Turning around, there's immediately a few different colors apparent in the rocks. There's this kind of tan, a little bit reddish, sort of iron staining, and that's weathering on the outside of this unit. And on the inside of the fresh surfaces, it's black with lots of big crystals in there. And I think we'll pick up this guy here, and you can see there's a nice Augite fragment right in the rock there, sitting on the surface. There's reported up to about 3 centimeters or just over an inch in size Augite. And you don't really have to dig to find stuff, but since a lot of this stuff will be surface picked, you may just want a little shovel, or I just have my rock hammer, just clear away some debris and see if anything falls out. I'm not sure if there's any rhyme or reason to where in this you should be looking for Augite. Dug just a little bit into the hillside there and pulled out a crumbly piece, and if I get it into the sun, whoa, it's a little steep here. Get it into the sun, there's a pretty nice Augite with there's a termination on the end of that, so that's the end of the crystal. It can form terminations kind of like quartz, but if we try and get a little closer, at the end of my thumb there's a bit of green, and Augite can be blackish but also dark green, and this rock is really crumbly, so I could probably just break it apart, and there you go, there's some clean Augite. What is that, 6 sides? 7, 8 sides? There's some flies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 sides, yeah, that's what I know how to count. Augite tends to form squat, sort of equant crystals. It's probably hard to tell, but the axes are slightly not 90 degrees. The crystal faces are tilted slightly to the left, kind of parallel to my thumb in this direction. And that's because of the crystal habit that these augite crystals have. And these augite are in the Heddenbergite diopside crystal solid solution, which means that they're very calcium rich. That one has a nice termination on the end. There's a lot of overburden or dirt that's washed down from uphill. And if you don't want to go all the way up there to the freshest outcrops, I think your best bet is to kind of go off to the side of the trail a little bit. On the left side here, there's some of this darker stuff peeking out. And this is all the same unit. I mean, this whole hillside is all the unit. And since I have a relatively fresh piece here, what this is, you can see how granular it is. And if you were to come up across it, maybe you'd think it was sedimentary or, river deposited or a breccia or something, lots of little clasts coming together and being lithified. But this is actually made up of rock fragments and volcanic ash that is welded together through the heat of an eruption to make a volcanic tuff. And even though it's tough, even though the name is tuff, this is very crumbly. That does not refer to the strength of the rock. But this is made up of mostly, rock fragments and the augite. So this is a crystal lithic tuff, is what it's called. I forget the name of the actual unit that it's called in the books, but I'll look it up and put it up on the screen when I get back. But the units here are pretty massive, and there's no indication of pyroclastic flows or anything like that. You probably recognize that term from, Mount St. Helens, which formed a pyroclastic density current when it erupted and swept down the mountainside and layered ash and debris all together, whereas this is mostly just the tuff. And so what that could suggest is that these were deposited in a relatively more quiet environment in terms of the ash just fell and settled out. And there's some indications from some stratigraphy that these might have been deposited in a shallow marine environment. So either a lake or a near shore environment. I'm not sure where the shoreline was at this time that these were erupted. And I've been working on this rock here for a few minutes. This used to be about, 3 times this size. And in that time, I've pulled out a small handful of decent sized augite. There's a little bit of weathering on the surface, but I think that would come out pretty easily with a little bit of iron out or acid or something. And the only thing I'm concerned about is a lot of these bigger ones seem to be fractured. There's a nice piece. And that came out very easy. If you're working with hand samples and you're trying to get a delicate crystal out, never work your way towards the crystal with your hammer or chisel or whatever you're doing. Always kind of chip away on the outside of it so the stresses go away from the rock, and that way you're less likely to break it. It's probably very delicate, but there's a little V of these two crystals that grew into each other. On the on the surface here, you break any of these rocks, there's tons of augite everywhere in this. It's up to 40% augite, I believe. And what happened was these crystals grew while the magma was crystallizing in sort of a mush underground. And when the pressure or whatever that was keeping them underground was released, and they pressure released and exploded out onto the surface, the crystals were entrained in that in that exploded mush and tuff and ash flow and were exploded out onto the surface. And so these crystals are primary from the original magma source. They weren't secondary crystallization from any kind of alteration or anything like that. Augite, it has a hardness of, I think, 5.5 to 6 or so. It's a little less than quartz. It may not be much of a jewelry kind of piece, although some of the dark green can look pretty. But if you have it in something that you don't wear every day, it could be a nice accent piece. A little bit of green or dark black. I don't know if anybody facets augite. It's kind of nice to dig into the hillside and have rocks tumble down, and then all of a sudden there's just augite, 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 crystal, and then there's plenty more to be had. I meant to bring it and forgot, but if you were to bring a sifter here and just go through a lot of this loose stuff, I bet you could do pretty well. It breaks up pretty easy. Just throw that in there and sift out, and let's see, I can see there's a small augite there. You know, you get a lot of small stuff, but there might be some larger crystals in here that people wouldn't see just from digging out like I'm doing now. Here we are, home from vacation with augite in tow, and you can see I've got a lot of loose crystals here, plenty for my collection and to give away to a few people. And the largest sample that I collected was about 3/4 inches across, so not quite as large as has been reported in the site, but I did find, I think I mentioned this in the video, that a lot of the larger crystals tended to be more fractured. I think because of the way they were emplaced, they were just more likely to be fragmented as they were erupted and deposited. And I brought home a couple of large cobbles. These are about 4 or 5 inches across. I enjoyed kind of breaking them apart and picking out the crystals, and I thought maybe some of my friends or family would